Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Should MLG&W move on from TVA? Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us as we continue to do the show remotely. We are taking a bit of a departure from coronavirus this week and looking at the very complicated and big issue of whether MLG&W should end its 80-year relationship with TVA and look for another source for electric power. To that end, we're going to bring on two guests who formed an advocacy group looking at exploring the idea of MLG&W leaving TVA. We'll start with Carl Sledwitz. He's CEO of Monogram Foods and has been involved in all kinds of civic projects in Memphis. Carl, thanks for joining us remotely.
Good to be here.
Also, Jim Gilliland Jr. He's a principal at Diversified Trust and his background in, we'll talk about municipal finance and utility finance, and we'll let Jim explain that in a little bit. But first, Jim, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. As with a lot of very complicated issues, I'm going to turn to Bill here to kind of lay out some of the background. People, I think, one, this is an incredibly complicated issue. We've touched on a few shows in the last year. Bill has written about it a lot. Other organizations have written about it. But particularly with coronavirus going on, I think people are probably a bit distracted from what is really an incredibly important business, civic, tax, and political issue. So, Bill, could you just tee up where we are in this question of moving and what's happening now and what happens next?
Yeah, this issue has more acronyms than just about anything I think I've dealt with in recent memory. Tennessee Valley Authority supplies electric power to Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Division. Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Division joined TVA in 1939, and Light, Gas, and Water is TVA's largest customer. So, several years ago, there was this plan by Franklin Haney, a Chattanooga developer, to buy the Bellefonte nuclear plant in Hollywood, Alabama from TVA, with the idea that the power from that could be used to supplant TVA or supplement TVA, but would provide electric power to Memphis Light, Gas, and Water. In fact, Haney's company, Nuclear Development, actually had a non-binding letter of intent with Memphis Light, Gas, and Water to explore that particular option. The sale of that power plant to Nuclear Development by TVA did not close. It's now the subject of a court battle in Huntsville, Alabama. So the question remains, is TVA the best deal for Memphis Light, Gas, and Water? And that's what is being explored on a number of fronts. There is an integrated resource plan that's being developed now. We expect the first draft later this month to the Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Board. That will come with a recommendation from the utilities president and CEO, J.T. Young. That plan looks at not just rates. We've had about 4 studies so far that have all come to the same general conclusion that a switch to another provider could save Memphis Light, Gas, and Water hundreds of millions of dollars. And that ranges from about $250 million to $450 million in those studies. Those studies are independent of the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan that Light, Gas, and Water is about to receive from a consulting firm. That study will look not only at rates, but at what to expect in the way of cost for transmission lines, things like that. It will also look at the reliability of other suppliers as well. So that's kind of where we are. Again, this is an 80-year relationship that is at stake here. The Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Board would make the first decision on that. Depending on what that decision is, it could go to the Memphis City Council after that.
And they have to, if I'm not mistaken, before we bring our guests in here, starting with Carl, that they've got to give 5 years notice. And also, let me also note that we've invited JT Young, CEO of MLGW, to come on the show this week. He was not able to. We're going to try to get him on a show in a future week. And the same with representatives from TVA. We'll try to get them on soon. Carl, again, with that complicated setup, but it's just such a complicated issue. And I thank Bill for trying to break that down for us. You all are not involved with the Haney nuclear plant in Alabama. This is completely separate from that, correct? So let me talk about what you all are advocating for and why.
Sure. Jim and I's advocacy group is not affiliated with anybody in particular, including the Nuclear Initiative. We're working with a lot of people that share our common goal, organizations like Friend of the Earth and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and have had conversations with Sierra Club, et cetera. But collectively, there are a lot of interest, including ours, that simply want to explore and validate our hypothesis that if Memphis Light, Gas, and Water were to leave TVA, which you're right, they have to give a 5-year notice, but it's interesting that in 2002, the powers that be at Memphis Light, Gas, and Water in the city of Memphis negotiated this 5-year exit, which other communities do not have, with us being able to leave without any penalty, without having to assume any portion of the now 24, almost 25 billion of debt that TVA has run up. And that was because we lent our credit when TVA needed it, and that was one of the negotiated things. So because of that, and because of another unique set of circumstances, that we are geographically in a perfect position. We are right next door to the nation's largest provider of energy, 5 times almost the size of TVA. It's called MISO, Mid-Internet Systems Organization, that goes from Louisiana all the way to Canada, and it includes our neighbors in Arkansas, Crittenden, Arkansas, and Crittenden County, and South Haven, Mississippi. So our ability to connect into MISO is relatively inexpensive in the big scheme of things, and MISO is providing rates 20 to 40% less. So just take for a moment and realize that Memphis Light, Gas, and Water's budget is over $1 billion. Our entire city of Memphis budget last year was $711 million. We believe that the facts show that by switching to MISO, we can take 250 to 450 million savings and return them to the ratepayers and taxpayers of Memphis. The largest transformational thing that could change this city's budgetary plight that I have ever seen, and I'm a lifelong Memphian.
And is that is a one-time savings or an ongoing savings?
That is an annual recurring savings.
Okay, and it is, and I'm going to cheat because I wrote it down. It is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. That is MISO that we're talking about here. Let me bring in Jim Gilliland. Jim, you talk a little bit about your background and how you got involved with this, and why you also are putting this effort into advocating for this alternative.
Thank you, Eric. The reason that I am invited, that I was asked by Carl to look into this with him, is primarily because of my background in the municipal bond market profession. I've spent 22 years in the municipal bond market, and that includes the vast sector of electric revenue bonds and utilities, and how cities and states and counties buy their electric power and from whom. And so I felt, and I used to be an investment banker at Morgan Keegan, and I was there when Morgan Keegan underwrote MLG&W's large prepay gas bonds. I think that was 10 years ago. So I know municipal bonds and the factors that go into that entire sector is the only thing I'm a little bit dangerous in life. And so Carl asked me to look into it, And I have known Carl through my family for many years. And I duly note that Carl's personal efforts on the University of Tennessee Board of Trustees or Board of Regents years ago, Carl led the effort to have significant funding uh, added at the medical school here that had been neglected for years and years. So I don't doubt Carl's civic endeavors on this matter. And the more I read into it, the more I agreed. And finally, about 10 days ago, I told Carl that I would get involved because I think the facts on the table are all in Memphis's favor to look at a different option away from the Tennessee Valley Authority.
And let me also say, because you'll be modest. I mean, your family's been very involved in all kinds of civic enterprises in Memphis as well. Bill, let me go to you you ask these folks questions, but a question for you, just because we don't have all the parties on here that we would necessarily like. Has MLGW reached out to MISO and asked for a proposal to take over power?
Memphis Light, Gas and Water says that Siemens, the consulting firm that's doing the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, has talked with MISO about this. One development as the city council was talking about this a couple of weeks ago, J.T. Young said that basically Siemens has already come to the conclusion that it would, in his words, not be prudent for Memphis Light, Gas and Water to join MISO without having the capability, Memphis Light, Gas and Water having the capability to generate at least some of its own power. Memphis Light, Gas and Water currently does not generate its electrical power. Obviously, this has been one of the more debated points of this. And let me start with you. This kind of that conclusion by J.T. Young goes to some concerns you've had about the IRP and how valid it is, correct?
Yeah, it definitely is. It flies in the face of what 4 other independent studies have concluded, that there is a viable way to do it without us generating much, if any, of our own power, like many cities across this country do. And to not even look into that, we think it flies in the face of reason. As Dr. Warren says, who is the city councilman that has a resolution that will be coming up this next Tuesday, asking the city to formally ask MISO to look into this. This is too big of a decision not to ask for a second opinion. And so far, 4 independent studies have said Memphis can be like a lot of cities around the country and not have to get into the power generation business. And if we have to generate any, it would be very small. So we definitely do not think that it's a complete, thorough process to avoid or to not even look into that. And we are convinced that MISO has not been asked that direct question to provide their professional answer from what happens to be the largest energy provider in this country, an entity that's 5 times the size of TVA, that is right next door to us. Why wouldn't we ask their professional opinion?
All right. Jim, from your vantage point, how does Memphis Light, Gas and Water get into the electric power generation business? And is there a sizable cost associated with that?
Well, we don't think there is any reason on earth that MLG&W should get into the electric power generation business. Siemens' draft report apparently says that's the only viable option to leave the Tennessee Valley Authority. And Siemens, we do trust their opinion on how much it costs to build power plants. That's their business. They say it'll cost $7 to $8 billion to build a series of power plants owned and operated by the city of Memphis in order to leave the Tennessee Valley Authority. And as we know, many cities in the country do not produce any power, and there are some that produce a little bit. So we simply don't believe that the only option is for Memphis to produce all of its power. And to our knowledge, the IRP has not asked MISO what they will tell us it will take for Memphis to plug into their existing transmission system that is located in DeSoto County, Mississippi, and Crittenden County, Arkansas.
So they haven't talked to them about that particular option, according to you. My sense of this whole process is that this is not just about asking questions, it's about how you ask the questions because it's so technical. Am I correct about that?
Yes, sir.
Mhm.
How you ask the questions, the city council meeting last week, two MLGW officers were there answering questions. One officer said that MISO has stated they could not provide power, which we're skeptical of. And the second answer from an MLGW official was that the IRP said it's imprudent for Memphis to look into joining MISO in its marketplace of electricity. And we just can't get our heads around how that is considered imprudent given the numerous cities already part of MISO who are very happy with what's going on.
Carl, do you see some concerns about joining what is a marketplace? MISO is a consortium. It's also a nonprofit. We should also point out. Are there risks that we need to map out if we're leaving TVA to go to that kind of arrangement?
So first, people need to understand that TVA is the last monopoly of providing energy in this country. TVA provides less than 15% of the energy. The rest of this country, 85% of the country, gets its energy through one of these nonprofit co-op networks. The largest just happens to be next door to us, which makes it so conceivable. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are proposing getting our energy the way 85% of the rest of this country does. And their reliability is every bit as big, every bit as solid, every bit as predictable as TVA's. They're both regulated by the same agency. TVA is a dinosaur in our estimation, and it is the last monopoly. It does not, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water contractually has to buy 95% of its energy from TVA. The reason when you take away market competition, you take away the opportunity to get lower rates. Many of the customers of MISO enter into 5, 10, 15-year fixed rate contracts, long-term rate contracts. We, on the other hand, are subject to the whims of TVA every year. They have raised our rates over 30% in the last 10 years, and we have no alternative. Contractually, we have to buy from them. That's why they're a monopoly. And why they are a dinosaur is because they have invested and misinvested billions of dollars, hence why they now have 24 billion of debt in things like spending hundreds of millions in Memphis to clean up coal ash over the next few years that they announced recently when they removed the old Allen coal plant, or over $1.5 billion that they've spent in the last 8 years, with $2 billion more to remove coal ash from the tsunami of coal ash that they dumped into hundreds of people's homes and ruined them in East Tennessee, and billions of dollars of lawsuits. They are a no longer competitive. And it's why, by the way, it's one of the few things that I think you'll find that Barack Obama and Donald Trump agree on. They have both called, while they were president, for the dismantling of TVA. Just 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump in a press conference said it was outlandish that the CEO of TVA last year was the highest paid government official in the country, paid $8.1 million. Last year, he bought a $7 million helicopter from Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, to go with a $12 million jet that he bought the year before, which was the second jet he had. The TVA is bureaucratically out of control. Their energy systems are archaic in many cases, and they have this bloated debt of 24 billion and this gigantic, expensive bureaucracy that no longer makes them competitive. Yet we are dealing with a monopoly that says you've got to buy your rates from us no matter what we charge. And
All
that's
right,
what we're
Is it
trying to
not
get away from.
is it not possible that that MLGW could go into a kind of hybrid situation? I mean, does anything that prevents it? I mean, everything you just said about TVA notwithstanding, and let me repeat that we'll be reaching out to TVA representatives to get them on the show. They have said in a statement, because we brought up TVA, that there are false and misleading claims being said, and it's unfortunate. A small number of people with specific financial interests continue to attempt to mislead the people of Memphis, said the TVA. The information on savings conveniently leaves out key findings from Siemens. They also claim, Siemens says it'll cost $7.7 billion for Memphis to leave TVA. And we talked about some of that before. But is it not also possible that Memphis buys some power from MISO and some power from TVA? Does anything prevent that kind of arrangement? Is that, I'll go to you, Jim.
It is our understanding that the TVA does not negotiate all of its contract terms with every single one of its customers. The cities in its footprint are exactly the same.
Gotcha.
So it's a take it or leave it from the TVA.
In terms of, let me turn again and ask a question of Bill. You wrote a story this last week, I think. You've written a number of stories about this, but it is getting a little heated at City Council with this issue. There are a lot of advocates working, you know, they aren't called lobbyists within City Council. There's not a lobbyist registration, but there are advocates for TVA doing a lot of work within the halls of City Council, I think it's fair to say. And Councilman Carlisle even had a bit of a outburst about this. That outburst might be unfair, but some real frustration that these advocates aren't really registered as lobbyists. There's a tremendous, what I'm getting at is there is a tremendous push underway on the part of TVA to keep this contract, right? And they are working City Council pretty hard because ultimately it would be City Council would have the deciding vote on leaving or staying.
It's a push on several sides. TVA is involved in, and you're right, they don't call their people lobbyists, but they do function as lobbyists. Nuclear development, while that company has been wrapped up in federal court in Huntsville over Bellefonte, has devoted a lot of its efforts and powers of persuasion to actually back the MISO option in this as well. As Carl pointed out at the outset, this effort, $450 million for Memphis, is the name of the group. It is not involved in hiring lobbyists. It is strictly a civic campaign at this point. But yeah, before the entry of this group, there have been a lot of the different interests competing for attention before the council, and Councilman Carlisle's complaint was that they're giving the council bits and pieces that obviously favor their particular position in this. And the council has a lot of questions about this coming from a lot of different points of view. As Jim and Carl have mentioned, Council Member Dr. Jeff Warren wants to get some kind of readout from MISO on this directly to the council for it to look at it. Artavius Jones, also on the council, said, well, we need to keep this process independent of seeking out any specific entity that might be a competitor or TVA. In his words, we need to be agnostic about.
Let me. We only have 2 minutes left. I want to go back to Carl and make sure I asked this question because it's important. We're talking about money. There's a tremendous amount of influence and so on. Do you have a financial interest in TVA? I mean, in MLGW moving from TVA? I mean, how you're putting in your own money, I believe.
Absolutely not. Jim and I have put in writing that we have no staff, we have no lobbyists, we have no vested interest. We put up our own money. We have raised some money from our letters of asking for support. I'm proud to tell you that former Mayor Dick Hackett wrote, "I'm behind you." Former County Mayor Bill Morris, I know what TVA's done to Memphis over the years. Current Congressman Steve Cohen, current County Mayor Lee Harris, and over 100 businessmen and women and community activists have joined us. And you are right. Carlisle criticized all of the lobbyists, but think about it. TVA has hired 5 lobbyists, 3 PR firms, and is running TV campaigns and billboards, all being paid by us ratepayers. Why are we not incensed that that's how they're using their money to lobby our city council?
All right. And you all have a website if people want to learn more about what you're doing?
A better way than TVA.org, a better way than TVA.org. And we lay out transparently. My partner, Jim Gillen, has done a phenomenal job. We show you how we come up with the 450 million savings. We refute a lot of myths and facts, and we're constantly downloading all the information. And we have the 4 previous reports that all support our position.
Okay. All right. Hey, thank you both. It's an incredibly complicated issue. And thank you all for joining. We'll have other folks on other parts of this issue on in future shows. Bill's been writing about it. Commercial Appeal, I think the Flyer has, everybody has. But that is all the time we have right now. Thank you all for joining us. And please do join us again next week.